Hi everyone, welcome in the channel. Today we're going to talk about how to ship to China as an e-commerce brand. Before we go ahead, remember to subscribe to the channel because as we said in the last video, this is going to be a series. So this is going to be most likely a part 3 and I need you to let me know what you think and what you need some help with in the comments. Also, leave a like to the video if you enjoyed it. Moving forward with our topic today, we're going to look at different modes on how you can ship or import your products directly to your customers. The first mode is through cross-border e-commerce, which means that you're shipping from anywhere in the world directly to China. So it's from one country to another, and they place the order directly on your website. Second mode is through a bonded warehouse. You basically move some stock in China in a custom warehouse, basically. So a bonded warehouse is like a temporary warehouse where you can store your goods without paying any duties and taxes, and then eventually you do the clearance, the real formal paper, let's say documentation, once you have the sales. So if you sell something to a Chinese customer tomorrow, you do the clearance for 1 unit tomorrow instead of doing for all the shipments, for all the inventory, for all the stocks that you actually move to China. So let's say that you want to import the 1,000 units of your product. You don't really have to do it right away. You can just store them in a bonded warehouse, do some little paperwork, and then eventually when you start selling to the customers, it's when the clearance happens. So you're going to actually clear them one by one instead of doing that in bulk, because there are a lot of restrictions in terms of amount of declared value, but also how to clear the goods. If you do it in bulk, you most likely need someone to have a license or permit, but if you actually use a bonded warehouse, you don't need all of that because your final customer is going to be the receiver, the importer records, and it's going to be, let's say, sold through a personal, let's say, import, personal use type of, let's say, a channel, which means it's going to go through the e-commerce channel, so you're going to benefit from the 5,000 RMB threshold and so on. So there are some benefits of importing stocks, which is not really moving stocks to China to a bonded warehouse, rather than importing them into a physical warehouse in China. So bonded and non-bonded warehouses are two different things. Eventually, there's another mode. It depends if you actually have the manufacturing in China for your products. Then at that point, it may make sense to just have your manufacturer pre-build and pack and basically prepare the products as ready to sell, and then eventually ship directly to your customers rather than shipping cross-border from another country or anything else that, you know, may sound a little bit too difficult or with too many formalities to run through. So eventually it would make sense to just have your manufacturer ship your products to your customers. Or there's another mode, which is basically to import the stocks, but at that point you need to have a company there. You need to actually at least have a broker representative, someone that imports on your behalf, and that's quite expensive because can you imagine someone that is actually taking the responsibility on your behalf? You know, that's quite a big responsibility if your product meets standards, and how can we know? How can they know, right? Even if they kind of run an investigations on your company, your products, it's always going to be something that they may miss. It's always going to be a risk. So at the point, it's always, you know, the choice is, do I run through cross-border e-commerce? Do I run through, let's say, a bonded warehouse, or I run it through the general trade, which means I'm going to have a company, I'm going to import stocks by myself, and then eventually distribute and sell them locally. Now, let me remind you about the demand of foreign goods and how customers in China actually what are their habits. So eventually they want to have fast and cheap shipping options, and they want to have the customer support being always available and being very responsive, and you know, kind of have a good quality in terms of customer service, because most of the times when you talk to someone in another time zone or like a brand that is established anywhere else in the world, then you have the time zone different, they may not reply right away, you may need to wait days. That's definitely not something that they would appreciate, and especially when we think about the platforms like Tmall or JD, where actually, you know, they expect they have anyone who sells there has like great customer service you can talk to, the fact that they are fast, there's some standards that you need to meet every time you want to start selling there, no language barriers, something that actually it happens a lot when they purchase from overseas. So you don't have to go directly with the thought that you're going to win the market, because that's going to be very difficult. You need to really follow their habits and how they like to buy online, basically. So before you actually decide to ship or decide to expand to China, think about what are the customers' habits, which may be a little bit different. They use a lot of those marketplaces like Tmall, JD, they use a lot of WeChat, so you may want to have a store there, you want to start maybe to sell your products there. We will talk about this as well later in the videos, but there are some requirements when you start selling Tmall. You cannot just go there. There are some commitments in terms of budget that you need to have. Maybe worth to start via, let's say, with your own e-commerce if you don't really have budget to test the market, but you need to make sure that, you know, you kind of meet the requirements of the consumers. So like customer service being pretty much available at least in the time zone where they are, and no language barriers, so speak Chinese. With the customer support, have the landing page, your website in Chinese. So little things that are going to help you boost your sales and definitely also establish your brand, compared to just try to sell in English and as you would do in any other market without any localization, basically. So moving back to our discussion about the cross-border e-commerce type of sale and shipping. So there are actually three things that we should keep in mind when we talk about e-commerce and cross-border e-commerce. There are three regulations that China released for the cross-border e-commerce, and one of them is called the circular, one is called the notice, and the other it's called the positive list. So if we start in order, there's the circular. What is this? The circular tries to give some guidelines, and like not give some guidelines, but sets the responsibilities of those e-commerce brands that try to sell to Chinese customers and that target China, such as transparency. You need to make sure that when you sell to China, you're actually being transparent with the customers, because you don't have to, for example, compared to general trade, when you import in bulk, you don't really have to have a permit or license. You don't really have to meet the standards, so be careful with that. Generally, when you ship something for personal use, we said in the other video that if you ship something for personal use, you don't always have to have, for example, the CCC mark, the Chinese conformity certificate, saying that it's safe, they run through some tests and it's accepted by China to meet China standards. You don't really have to do it, except for some cities like Shanghai, and in that case, in this case, you don't really have to do it. But of course, you still need to make sure that your customers know that. So you need transparency. You need to communicate. You don't really need to meet those standards. You don't really need to have the label in Chinese, but you need to give some option. You need to give some information. For example, when you distribute locally, you need to have the labels in Chinese. But when you ship cross-border e-commerce, you can actually have your labels in English. But you need to make sure there's actually somewhere the customers can go to read the exact same thing in Chinese, which is basically maybe a QR code or anything else that basically redirects you to maybe a landing page where all the information are listed online, as long as you provide some information in local language, basically. And then eventually also any information about safety standards. They are different from China, so you don't really have to meet Chinese standards. You can meet the standards of your own country from where you're shipping to, but you need to make sure that your customers know about that. So you need to explain what are the standards and what's the difference compared to the Chinese one, especially in terms of hygiene, when we talk about kind of delicate products, I would say. You're responsible for quality and standards overall. You need to make sure that they are safe. No matter which standards you follow, at least they are safe and there's quality and your customers are informed. Then you need to make sure the return refunds policies are in place to benefit the customers, so that in case of damages you can reimburse them. So all this return policy needs to be implemented carefully. So in a few words, to summarize, there's much more to that, but to summarize a little bit, anything that is shipped cross-border, so if any product shipped via cross-border e-commerce, doesn't really have to meet the exact same standards and regulation that a product will need to meet, or an e-commerce or a brand will need to meet in the moment that they actually import goods to China for local distribution. Then we have the notice. The notice actually kind of regulates the taxation point of view and the thresholds when you ship cross-border. So let me give you an example. So when you ship cross-border, you can actually ship maximum 1 parcel per day, and also subject to a threshold of 5,000 RMB, which means that every day you cannot ship more than 1 parcel, and you cannot actually to the same individual, be careful, to the same individual, no more than 1 parcel, no more than a total declared value for that parcel of 5,000 RMB. So the maximum that a Chinese customer can purchase cross-border online from another brand located overseas is 5,000 RMB per day. Now, it's not only per day, there's a maximum amount per year, which is 26,000 RMB. So a maximum, a customer can purchase 26,000 RMB worth of goods from overseas, and you may wonder what happens if they go above that. Well, the custom clearance will be a general trade, which also means almost impossible if you're not prepared to actually deliver the product. So you need to refund and just get the product back, because in that case, general trade means literally you need to have license permit, a lot of special documents and so on. So it's actually quite difficult to make it happen and to do it unless you already know and you're already prepared. But at that point, you know, what's the difference if you're already prepared to do the general trade clearance? What's the difference from shipping cross border rather than importing locally? You know, you may want to import directly locally and use a general trade model. Now, what happens is if instead you purchase, or they purchase, more than 5,000 RMB worth of goods per day. We're not talking about the annual threshold, we're talking about the daily threshold. Well, in that case, you just pay duties and taxes in full. And the reason why I'm saying in full is because when you actually, let's say, ship cross-border as a brand, you get access to a little discount in the VAT consumption tax that they have, which is like 30% off basically. So if the VAT is 17%, you're going to pay 70% of the 17%, which is 11.9. So basically you get the lower rates in terms of VAT. That's the benefit. Otherwise, you know, if the VAT is 17% and you go above the 5,000 RMB, well, you need to pay 17% instead of 11.9. And remember, duties and taxes are assessed on chief value. And remember to state on the commercial invoice all the different costs that you may have. So shipping, insurance, and value of the product. Well, of course, if you don't use the cross-border e-commerce channel and you use the personal import, there's a total different threshold. We mentioned in the former video, check the part 1, the other video about China, importing to China, but pretty much you have 1,000 RMB of a threshold instead of 5,000. So definitely this is better, you know, if you're already in a e-commerce store, just go for the e-commerce clearance. Now, let's look a little bit into this discounted rate of the notice. This is an example coming from the Hong Kong Trade and Development Council, where they share an example how it will work. So let's say that you are an e-commerce brand shipping from overseas and your retail price is a high-end cosmetic product and it's worth 500 RMB. Of course, the import tax rate is 0% and the VAT is 13%. The import consumption rate is 15%. So we have, in case A, for imports under the general trade, you will have to pay consumption tax and VAT respectively for 88.24 RMB and 76.47. So if you look at the import tariff, you have no tariff. So it's 500 RMB per zero, nothing to pay. Consumption tax is like 500, and this basically is telling you how to calculate this consumption tax and the VAT as well. You will need to get basically its chief value plus duties, taxes, and so on. So if you want to calculate VAT, you take the basic price, which is 500 RMB, and you sum the consumption tax and the tariff, but the tariff is 0%, so you don't actually sum them. And so we have 500 plus 88, which is the consumption tax, and then you eventually calculate the VAT on the sum, and it's 76.47 RMB. So total taxes is 164.71 RMB, and that's quite expensive. However, if you do ship something like if you ship cross-border, you basically get access to a lower integrated tax, which is okay. Again, import tariff is 3%, and integrated tax is basically you take how much you're going to pay for consumption tax and VAT, you sum everything together also with the import tariff, so we have 0 plus 88.24 plus 76.47, and you multiply everything for 70%. Why is that? Because we said that you get a 30% discount on the taxes, so it's actually basically the 70% that you're going to pay instead of the 100%. And then we have the positive list. The positive list contains all the different products that you can import through this model. So if you want to benefit from the 70% VAT and actually integrated tax discount, and you want to benefit from the threshold 5,000 RMB where you don't have to do this huge clearance with special documents and formal entries and license and permit, well, at that point you just need to make sure that your product is one of the listed ones. So the positive list basically tells you which product can be shipped using this e-commerce channel, which gives you quite a bit of a benefit. Now, goods that are not present in the list doesn't mean that you can't ship them to China. Simply they're going to be covered under the general trade, so you need a broker, you need more clearance, formal clearance, and so on. So it's just a different process, and eventually I suggest you to consult with to actually talk to a consultant for that, because general trade is literally like another story. So this is a little bit how it works with the e-commerce channel, like how you can basically there are different types of clearance. There's the clearance for personal use, for personal import, there's the clearance for e-commerce, for cross-border e-commerce, and then there's the clearance for documents, there's the clearance for let's say the general cargo, for general trade. So different type of documents, different type of threshold, different type of taxes that apply. So just make sure that if you're shipping cross-border as an e-commerce store, that you know that your courier is actually using the right channel rather than following the general trade clearance, because that's going to be a little bit difficult to handle with if you haven't never tried. Basically, that's all for today. Thanks for watching. I hope it was helpful. Let me know what you think in the comments and what would you like to see in the next videos as well, and I will be happy to address it. Thanks again for watching. See you in the next video.